So welcome everyone to this edition of Success Stories. As you know, Work on Climate is the world's largest community focused on transitioning people into climate work. And we do this series of events, which we call Success Stories, where we highlight members of our community that have been successfully working in climate or are successfully working on a transition into climate. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our three panelists for today. We have, to start off, Jack Kim, and Jack is a current PhD student in the Environmental Science, Policy and Management Department at the University of California, Berkeley. He is exploring the effects of alternative water regimes on rice soil microbiome and methane emissions from rice paddies. Thank you for joining us, Jack.
Thank you.
Then we have Lydia LePage, and she has joined Capture 6 as a Director of Research in July. So Capture 6 is developing direct air capture facilities at scale using existing mature technology to pull CO2 from the air and permanently store it. And she originally trained as a chemist at Oxford and has over a decade of experience in applied chemistry. So we're very interested in understanding how she made a transition from academia over into industry. And we'll talk a bit about that. And she has experience leading a team in diagnostic startup environments and has worked in both science communication as well as policy. Welcome, Lydia.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And then last but not least, we have Laurie Muzzy, and Laurie's a soil scientist at the NC State office with the USDA, where she works on soil health, wetland conservation and compliance, urban agriculture, and general land use issues. She has an undergraduate degree in soil science and a master's focused on policy in environmental management, water resource management, and ecosystem science. And she's also an advisor on my venture that I'm working on right now, which is really nice. So we talk quite often, but welcome to the call, Laurie. Thank you for sharing your perspective with us. So let's get started. And the way we're structuring this event is a bit different this time. So we'll have a comment section, as I mentioned, where we'll ask questions of the panel. Then we'll move into audience Q&A, where all of you can feel free to either raise your hand or jump into the chat to ask questions. And then we'll do 3 breakout rooms, one with each speaker, around specific topics, which we'll cover a bit later when it's time for us to break out. But to kind of start us off, let's do a general question. So I have a question for you, Laurie and Lydia, which is, can you tell us a bit more about how you're working on climate in your current role? And then slightly different variation of that question for you, Jack, is, can you please tell us how your PhD subject is related to climate work and why you chose this for your PhD? So why don't we start off with Laurie and Lydia, please?
I'll go ahead. I'm a soil scientist at the United States Department of Agriculture and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which kind of the whole point of the agency is to make sure that farmers and ranchers are practicing good agricultural practices, more with better, well, they call it climate smart agriculture. So we'll just use those terms. However you want to interpret that. So I basically make sure that people aren't farming in wetlands, because there's a law in the United States that says you can't farm in wetlands. And it wasn't passed necessarily to protect wetlands, but to protect commodity crops. But I'm happy that in some way we have a law that protects wetlands. Working for a massive government agency is kind of, it's like taking the things that you can do and making sure those are done well. So I'm working on trying to ensure soil health in our state of North Carolina and generally in agriculture in my area. So we'll talk more. How about you, Lydia?
Yeah, so as you said, the Capture 6 is a direct air capture company. So directly trying to impact the amount of CO2 that's in the air by pulling it out and storing it as rock. So my role as director of research is to kind of identify the areas that we need to work on to both develop the technology, but also look at environmental impacts. And that can be kind of marine environment or terrestrial or the local communities as well. So kind of identifying where we need to be researching in order to implement that in the first facility and the facilities down the line as well.
Okay, I can go next. Hi everyone, my name is Jack and I'm a computational microbiologist in UC Berkeley. And currently I'm working on rice systems and specifically focusing on methane emissions from rice as they're a pretty heavy source of methane. And the way we approach it is that we do what's called a microbiome study in the soil. So it's pretty established that the microbiome in soil does affect the phenotypes or the traits of the plants above it. And usually that's by interacting in the roots, in the vicinity of the roots, also known as rhizosphere. The way we do it is we firstly do a treatment, which is called an alternative wetting and drying. And basically we do like a 10-day drain in the middle of the season. And that's been known to curb the methane emission by almost like 50%. And we are basically looking to unveil the detailed mechanisms behind that microbial leak. And by doing that, we are looking downstream to augment the process by doing some kind of engineering on the microbe side or the plant side to enhance the soil microbial communities that mitigate the methane emissions. So that's how it relates to the climate work in my PhD.
I see. And then just to kind of stay with that theme, Jack, so what motivated you to select this dimension to kind of pursue for your PhD?
Yeah, so firstly, I'm more of a methods person. So rice is my current system, but it can also vary over time. But I'd say like from a practical perspective, when you do PhD, usually you go where there's a lot of unknowns. And rice, especially in this treatment that I was mentioning, which is a mid-season drain, there's practically zero study on the system under this treatment using the method that we use. By the method, usually when people study microbial communities in soil, they do it genetically. And oftentimes they focus on what's called an amplicon sequencing. And that's been known to be biased to a degree. And there is like a more state-of-the-art technology for sequencing DNA in soil, which is also known as shotgun sequencing. And that's the approach that we are using, coupled with some methane emission measurements, of course. But like I'm digressing. But the point being, I focus on this firstly because it's a very heavy source of methane. And methane is, if you curb it, methane in the atmosphere has a lifetime of like 10 years. So you'll see effect as opposed to, I mean, CO2, you also see effect, but I'd say like methane also like is important in that regard as well in terms of the lifetime in the atmosphere. And it's just a blue ocean. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think all of us can, certainly resonate to that idea of these unknown frontiers to a large degree. So a question for you, Laurie and Lydia, what motivated you personally to look for these roles in climate, or what motivates you to work in climate?
Maybe I can start out this time. So it was a bit of a combination of multiple things. I was considering my next steps in academia, and I wasn't sure that the kind of next step, which the assistant professor role, was the right one for me. And then the pandemic happened, and everyone has a sort of time to think about what's really important. And the climate just stuck out to me. So I started looking into that, and also kind of had the startup experience, which showed me the sort of speed and scale which was possible in that environment. Just kind of dug into what skills I could translate into the climate space. So kind of looking both from a professional development, but also like a passion drive side as well. That's how I ended up in this role.
I love that. That's great. Don't necessarily have to follow in other PhD students' footsteps. Yeah. Mine is very different than yours. In about 2008, when the Great Recession happened, I just remember I was a server, and like I worked at a grocery store. I hadn't gone to college yet, and I was just thinking about like how our society values things that don't make any sense. Like, why are we building so many freeways when we can have public transit? Like, why have we not invested in that, and convenience over quality and stuff like that? And about the food system. And I thought about how compost is turning basically what would be landfill, like methane emissions. I didn't really know that at the time, but basically trash into soil nutrients, and then we could grow new food from it. Like, why don't we use that circular system? And I thought about that, and then I just decided to go to college for soil science, because that seemed like the closest thing to the stuff that I loved, like geology and environmental science and food. And the thing that I could do, like, science. I'm not really an engineering type of person, but I could do science and the things that really mattered to me, like land use. So yeah, I went to school for soil science because society in Los Angeles was kind of messed up, and I just wanted to change that or do what I could.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful sentiment, and I think that's kind of a need or a frustration or whatever you want to call it that a lot of folks in the community kind of share, that yearning to do something different, than the status quo. My co-host Lena will now ask you a few questions around job hunting specifically, which is very relevant for this community.
Hi all, thank you so much for joining the this month success stories. I wanted to ask a question for I guess it's more relevant to Laurie and Lydia. What was your general approach when you were looking for jobs in climate or like climate specific work? What websites or job boards did you use for that? Lydia, do you want to go first?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
So I actually just started chucking my resume out there. I applied for jobs way before I was ready, just to kind of get a sense of if any of my skills were interesting to any company working in climate, really. So it was a huge net at that point, and I was just learning about the space as well. And I had got introduced to work on climate by one of my friends who had managed to make the transition before me. So it's definitely like finding those jobs. I work on climate and climate base as well. And then as my sort of approach honed in on things, I started by doing the air miners boot up. So I got involved in that community and then realized I needed even more training. So I did the Terra.do program as well. And sort of all along these learning processes, I was finding more and more job applications that I could apply for and sort of building a network as well, to kind of really identify where my skills could be useful, because some fields just I didn't really think were open to me with my background. So that was it. It was kind of like a funnel process to finally reach the position that sort of fit my skill set the best. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, air miners has been such a good influential thing for me too. My approach was kind of like, well, I got a graduate degree and then the pandemic hit like immediately afterwards. And so it was, I was like throwing spaghetti at the wall kind of thing for a little while, which was probably a waste of time. But at the same time, I was also like getting involved in air miners and just like attending like book clubs online with, let's see, Work on Climate had a book club that I was in, and Nori has a couple really good podcasts, and so I joined their book club, and Citizens Climate Lobby and Sunrise Movement. Like I just did whatever webinars was around, just like sitting in my van in the driveway and talking to people like all over the world who had similar interests, and got to go down some rabbit holes and stuff. But yeah, the most helpful things have been air miners and work on climate and just talking to people in that way, and contacting people on LinkedIn. So it's still a spaghetti at the wall kind of thing, but I guess like more, my wall is smaller now. There we go.
Yeah, I think also honing my resume was a key part of it, because as an academic, it's like 5 pages and then you realize that no one wants to read that. And it took me a very long time to get it down to the kind of key points. And for each job as well, I would highlight different aspects of what I'd done. So kind of taking that hit on like what I thought was important and cutting down the resume was a process for sure.
Yeah, I remember speaking about it with you. How did you land this particular job that you currently have, this climate job?
Laurie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I talked to someone that I had known in California. I'd moved from California to North Carolina a few years before. I talked to someone I knew in California who was a soil scientist, and she said to volunteer for the Earth team at the agency that I currently work at. So it's just like, you kind of just like hang out with somebody. Like there's no specific program for volunteering or anything like that. So I got in touch with someone who was a soil conservationist in my area and met up with her in person and accompanied her on a few field visits to talk to some farmers. And I just tried to like make myself valuable in that way. Like I would, write down, I would just like take a lot of notes, and then afterwards I would send her like a little couple-page brief of everything that we talked about and the thing that the farmer wanted to know. And so later that year, and we had a great time, it was fun. But later that year, she saw a job at another office in our area, and I guess had someone call me to make sure that I had applied and write a cover letter and stuff like that, because federal jobs are kind of a weird application process. But I guess they recommended me for it, and I got the job offer without having any interviews or anything like that, because I guess they knew me already. And also, like I said, federal government direct hire jobs in the United States are kind of weird. But yeah, I tried to make myself useful to someone that like knew some stuff. I guess that's the gist of it.
Thank you.
So for me, I actually got in touch with my current company just through a friend of mine who had seen their post on LinkedIn. At that time, I wasn't really plugged into the network enough to spot everything. So that was just kind of a connection. And then it was a first brief interview, and then like a longer chat in person. It was quite a long process for me. So I'm not a US citizen. So whoever was going to hire me was going to have to apply for a visa as well. So it had to be, quite a certain job before I moved forward. But it did take a few months to get that going. I would say also, like during this time, I did volunteer as well. Laurie reminded me for a couple of things. I was volunteering for Work on Climate and a couple of other companies, just kind of seeing what skills I could, again, just kind of learning what skills I could contribute. So that really, really helped. That's all.
Thank you both. In chat, we have a question for Laurie. What were some unexpected values that came up out of your conversations?
I would say I'm just being able to talk to people and I guess just let them know what you know or what you're interested in. Sometimes it's just like, if you ask a good question, then they know that you're you're like curious enough and like, you have the wherewithal to learn stuff. But yeah, I was in the Nori book club, and one person that my let's see, someone that eventually left Nori and restarted his consulting firm just kind of messaged me one day and asked me to like do a little project because he knew I was a soil scientist and like was looking for stuff to do. So he just messaged me and I did a little project, and then I worked with him on another project, and then I was working at his company. So that was like the first kind of post-grad job that I had. And it was just from like being in a book club and talking to people on air miners and, you know, answering a question if someone posted something. So that was probably the best thing that came out of conversations, but also just knowing like who people in the space are and knowing what people do, knowing what companies are being started or what they're working on or how they've pivoted. I guess just like knowing people in the mix and stuff like that is super helpful.
Yeah, I would also add that I did, so as I met people, I was asked for them for a chat for half an hour. So I think I did over 40 informational interviews with a whole range of people working at different jobs like NGOs and startups and crypto, which definitely isn't my bag, but it was fascinating to learn about all these things. So never turned down the opportunity to talk to someone about their past and how they've got to where they are right now.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good insight. And slightly related to that, around like this general sentiment of helpfulness that I think a lot of us have experienced within these communities. I kind of wanted to switch gears a bit and ask you, Jack, your current experience of the overall sentiment in academia at the moment toward climate related topics. Since you're actively in your PhD right now, are there any trends or any insights that you can share with us around the enthusiasm for climate research, grants, funding, and so forth? Are you seeing things shift or change in any way?
Yeah, so I have limited experience in academia. It's only my second year in PhD, but I did ask around in the lab to a lot of colleagues or like postdocs and staff scientists. So just before anything, I just want to like give you like an overview of some of the ways that they would job search. Maybe it'll be helpful. I don't know. So the biggest one seems to be DOE-BER, which is Department of Energy, Biological and Environmental Research. And they do a lot of grants for early career scientists or postdocs. But I think the biggest way to leverage on this is that if you go on their website, they have a PDF list of all the people who got awarded over the years. And you can actually actively keep a track of who gets awarded on what project. Say like it's some soil research and certain like ecosystems. Then what you can do is that you can follow up with the specific lab because it does tell you like what their name and what their institution affiliation is. And you reach out to them to show that like you're interested in this research. So that's I think a pretty high chance way of approaching them because they will have the money to hire you at that spot. Another one is that USDA also has a lot of grants in soil carbon. So that's also like a good way to leverage as an early career scientist or maybe a postdoc. In terms of more casual means of going about job searching, what people recommended to me the most was the Twitter. And specifically in my lab, every year we post everything on Twitter first. And sometimes that's the only thing we do because we already get a lot of applicants from Twitters. So follow the major labs or like even like larger institutions and you will see like job offers. And I think this is like really good, like Twitter. LinkedIn was like a less popular choice, at least for the research that I'm in. I think Twitter is like really active. And you can also go about searching in specific institutions. So like UC Berkeley has their own careers page and you can follow that. A lot of the national labs like Lawrence Berkeley National Lab or like national labs around the country, they have their own internal career pages. So you can just add them to your list and just go about like checking through them every once in a while because they don't actually actively advertise their positions outside of their internal network. So I think that's it for the job searching part. As for the enthusiasm, I'd say like generally academia tends to take a more long-term view on research. So in terms of timelines, they're quite different from private firms that have like a shorter timeline. So maybe you could say it's less stress, but I also disagree if you're like in assistant professor positions who are like pushed for tenureship every time. Anyways, timeline is definitely different. So that enables you to research things that are more just different, right? Because some things you can only answer in a longer term scale. And in terms of collaborations, it's incredible the amount of collaborations you can have in this setting, in this research setting specifically I'm in. And I don't mean just like interdisciplinary. It can also be like within the same discipline, within like, you know, people might have like different views on the same things. And that really provides you with valuable insight to move forward in your research. And you should, I mean, it's your choice to leverage on it. Not everyone leverages on their availability of collaborations, but it is there. And I think it's something that's really valuable. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective, Jack. There was a question from Yife in the chat around what the skills and qualities were that might have made, you know, any of you stand out to these hiring teams. Laurie already addressed it in the chat, but maybe we can briefly touch on it, Laurie, and then I'll open it up to you, Jack, and you, Lydia, as well.
Yeah, skills and qualities that make you stand out to a hiring team. If it's the way that, you know, if you're applying for a job in a traditional way where they're like looking at your resume first and maybe your LinkedIn profile, of course, like your education is gonna matter, but if you can talk to people, it's just so much better. So if you can show that you're curious and willing to learn and just interested and involved, then that's probably going to make you stand out more, and you'll be a good person to work with too. So that's important.
Any other thoughts, Lydia, on?
Yeah, so I had to spend quite a lot of time thinking about this to market myself to the industry, and now I'm hiring myself, so it's kind of seeing what I consider important going forward. But I think for me, my skills that were translatable were science communication, and that's like talking to people outside the field, a long way outside the field, or like just for grant writing. I had some science policy experience, which was also very useful. In a startup, like everything changes all the time, so you have to be very flexible, comfortable with uncertainty, and you know, making decisions on the evidence that's available. I know coming from academia, sometimes that's a big shift because you kind of want to wait for a long-term consensus before moving forward. But at a startup, you don't really have the time or the resources to do that. And having that flexibility is very valuable. And I think along with that, you know, the potential that the whole focus of the startup might pivot in the time that you're there. So kind of being open to different topics and different interests. Other things that I think were valuable for the company hiring was a little bit of management and leadership experience as well. And the passion can't be discounted, because if your passion for the topic comes across, then the mission is going to drive you a long way. And I think that was valuable for my position.
Jack, anything to add?
Just I feel like usually the best way to know what you need to know is that you just do read through the papers, like the publications that are on the field that you're interested in, at least like if you're intending to join academia. And those will give you an idea of some of the skills that you might want to know about it. In general, like bioinformatics, if you get into that, you can't really go wrong. Yeah, specific instruments, maybe those kind of expertise will help you leverage on. Yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Any other questions from the audience? You know, you can feel free to raise your hand or post it into the chat. And I know that Stanley added a pretty helpful comment around your tip on about Twitter, Jack, of setting up search alerts or hashtags on climate-related topics on LinkedIn and Twitter, so you keep getting kind of a feed. Any other questions from the audience that you want to cover before we move into the breakout rooms? And just while the audience is kind of thinking about that, I just wanted to reflect on what the three of you mentioned. And I think kind of the underlying theme there is one of storytelling, and just trying to limit the cognitive work that the recipient of your story has to do, to try and connect the dots. I think that's effectively what you're doing, which is relating your experiences or your specific skills to the opportunity or to the role. So I think that that's quite helpful. We have a question from Ishan, which is, what excites you the most about your work or your research? Perhaps we'll start off with Jack this time and then move along.
Okay. Thanks, Ishan, for the question. So for my work, what I'm most excited about is the applicability of the technique. So like when you do mid-season drains and rice paddies, it's not a particularly hard thing to implement. And you see such a large effect, and there is quite a large potential to augment the process. I mean, right now it sits around like 40 to 50% of reduction of methane throughout the season just from 10-day drain. I think you can make that higher if you do some engineering approaches. Maybe you can add certain microbes that augment the process. So I think that's what really excites me, the potential to improve on it and the fact that it's actually applicable as long as there is no yield hurt. That's like what the farmers are most sensitive about, the yield. And it's been shown that it doesn't affect the yield. So, well, if you implement it right, yeah, that's what excites me.
Lydia?
So I would say for my work, the potential for kind of short-term tangible impact is really a huge driver for me. Just personally, I had experience in academia where, I felt like the questions were very urgent, but things weren't moving at the rate that I was comfortable with. I was actually working on Alzheimer's disease. It's a huge problem. And the kind of ability to move was restricted by, the large institutions and the grant timelines. And I feel for me now, I get a lot more satisfaction from being in a startup environment. But the questions around the research in this environment are also really exciting to me, and the kind of partnerships and community are such a valuable part of it. So lots of things exciting for my current role.
I think the potential that, like Jack was saying, the potential for these like seemingly small practices or tweaks that they have to make a big impact is what definitely keeps me going and excited about soil. Some people are just like dirt, whatever, but there's so much going on. So it's just important to have a vision, obviously, in everything that you do. And so like if I think about like the most beautiful farm I've ever seen, how can we make more of those? And how can we make these like cool solar punk cities that I've seen on the cover of like solar punk novels? And I think just imagination, like keep your imagination going for your vision, and it's you can stay excited about stuff.